Little Johnny went to a horse auction with his dad. He watched as his father carefully inspected each horse, running his hands along their legs, rump, and chest. Curious, Johnny asked, "Dad, why are you doing that?" His dad replied, "Well, son, I need to make sure the horses are healthy before I buy them." Johnny thought for a moment, then said, "Uh-oh, Dad, I think the UPS guy wants to buy Mom." A little boy from a poor family wanted a bike for Christmas, so he asked his mom. She sighed and said, "We can't afford one, sweetie. Maybe you should pray and ask baby Jesus for it." Determined, the boy went to his room, grabbed some paper, and started writing. "Dear baby Jesus, I've been good all year. Please bring me a bike for Christmas." But as he reread it, he hesitated. That didn't feel entirely true. So he tried again. "Dear baby Jesus, I've been good for the past week. Please bring me a bike for Christmas." Still not convinced, he rewrote it. "Dear baby Jesus, if you give me a bike, I promise to be good all year." Even that felt like a stretch. Frustrated, he went outside to clear his head. As he strolled, he noticed his neighbor's statue of Mother Mary. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He climbed over the fence, snatched the statue, and ran home to hide it under his bed. Then he sat down to write one final letter. "Dear baby Jesus, if you ever want to see your mother again, send me a bike." George came home from university in tears. "Mom, am I adopted?" he asked. "Of course not," she replied. "Why would you think that?" George showed her his genealogy DNA test results. No matches with his relatives, but strong matches with a family across the city. Alarmed, his mom called her husband. "Honey, George took a DNA test, and I don't know how to say this. He might not be our son." "Well, duh," her husband said casually. "What do you mean?" she asked, shocked. He shrugged. "Remember our first night in the hospital? The baby wouldn't stop crying, screaming nonstop. You told me to change him." He smiled proudly. "So I did, and I think I picked a great one." A guy walks into a bar with his dog and says, "I'll have a scotch and water, and my dog will have a whiskey sour." The bartender frowns. "Sorry, no animals allowed." Before the man can argue, the dog pipes up. "Hey, that's discrimination. Just get me my drink." The bartender scoffs. "Oh, great. Another ventriloquist with a talking dog routine. Both of you out." The man pleads, "No trick, I swear. Tell you what, I'll step outside and you can talk to Gizmo yourself." He leaves, and the bartender watches him turn the corner. "All right, can I get my drink now?" the dog asks. Stunned, the bartender pours a whiskey sour. "It's on the house. Hey, could you do me a favor? My wife works next door at the cafe. Go order a coffee. It'll make her day. Here's $10 and keep the change." "Sure thing," says the dog, taking the cash and trotting off. 10 minutes later, the dog hasn't returned. The owner comes back and asks, "Where's Gizmo?" The two head out to look for him and spot Gizmo in the alley behind the cafe, getting frisky with a French poodle. The owner shouts, "Gizmo, what are you doing? You've never acted like this before." The dog shrugs. "Yeah, well, I've never had any money before." Employee, "Excuse me, sir, may I speak with you?" Boss, "Of course, come in. What's on your mind?" Employee, "Well, sir, I've been with this company for over 10 years, and I think it's time for a raise. I have 4 companies chasing me, so I wanted to talk to you first." Boss, "A raise? I'd love to, but times are tough right now." Employee, "I understand, but I hope you'll consider my hard work and loyalty to this company." Boss, "Fair enough. To keep you here, I'll give you a 10% raise and 5 extra vacation days. How does that sound?" Employee, "Perfect. Thank you, sir." Boss, "By the way, which companies are after you?" Employee, "Oh, the electric company, gas company, water company, and the mortgage company." A girl invites her boyfriend over for dinner to meet her parents. She tells him it's a big deal, and after dinner, she wants to take their relationship to the next level. It'll be her first time. The boyfriend is thrilled, but nervous. Since he's never been with a girl before, he goes to the pharmacy for advice. The pharmacist spends an hour explaining everything about condoms and safe sex. At the end, he asks, "So how many do you need, a 3-pack, 10-pack, or the family pack?" The boy confidently says, "The family pack. I'm going to need them all." That evening, he arrives at the girlfriend's house and meets her at the door. She beams and says, "I'm so excited for you to meet my parents. Come on in." They sit down at the dinner table, and the boyfriend nervously offers to say grace. He bows his head and starts praying. A minute passes, then 5, then 10. The boy remains silent, head bowed in intense prayer. After 20 minutes, the girl leans over and whispers, "I didn't know you were this religious." The boy whispers back, "I didn't know your dad was a pharmacist." An elderly gentleman walked into the pharmacy and asked for a prescription of Viagra. "How many do you need?" asked the pharmacist. "Just a few, maybe half a dozen," the man replied. "I cut each one into 4 pieces." The pharmacist raised an eyebrow. "That's too small a dose. It won't help with intercourse." The old man chuckled. "Intercourse? I'm over 90. I just want it to stick out far enough so I don't pee on my shoes." A man walks into a pharmacy and spends some time browsing the aisles. Eventually, a salesgirl notices him and asks, "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a box of tampons for my wife," he replies. She directs him to the right aisle. A few minutes later, he comes to the counter with a giant bag of cotton balls and a roll of string. Confused, the salesgirl says, "Sir, I thought you were buying tampons for your wife. What's all this?" He sighs and says, "Well, yesterday I sent her to get me a pack of cigarettes. She came back with a tin of tobacco and some rolling papers because it was so much cheaper. So, if I have to roll my own, she can too." Mr. Johnson, retired for a year, was having a conversation with his wife of 50 years when she suggested, "Why don't we take a cruise? We could go somewhere for a week and make wild love like we did when we were young." After some thought, Mr. Johnson agreed. He put on his hat and went down to the pharmacy to buy a bottle of Seasick pills and a box of condoms. When he got home, his wife said, "I've been thinking, why don't we make it a month-long cruise?" Mr. Johnson returned to the pharmacy and bought 12 bottles of Seasick pills and another box of condoms. Later, his wife suggested, "Since the kids are on their own now, why not cruise around the world?" Mr. Johnson went back to the pharmacy, this time buying 297 bottles of Seasick pills and the same number of condoms. At this point, the pharmacist couldn't hold back any longer. "Mr. Johnson, you've been coming here for over 30 years, and I don't mean to pry, but if it makes you this sick, why on earth do you keep doing it?" Mr. Johnson looked at him and replied, "Because it's the only thing that keeps her from getting seasick." A man goes for a job interview as a TV news broadcaster. The interview goes well, but there's one issue. He keeps winking at the camera. The interviewer says, "You have many of the qualities we're looking for, but the winking is a problem. We can't hire you unless you get it under control." The man replies, "No problem. If I take a couple of aspirin, I stop winking for a few hours. Plenty of time to finish the broadcast." "All right, show me," says the interviewer. The man reaches into his right pocket, but instead of aspirin, he pulls out an assortment of condoms in all shapes and sizes. Then he digs into his left pocket and pulls out even more condoms before finally finding the aspirin. He takes them, and his second attempt goes off without a hitch. The interviewer is impressed, but says, "I'd hire you, but we have a policy against hiring womanizers. Too many sexual harassment suits." The man protests, "I'm a happily married man, not a womanizer." The interviewer asks, "Then how do you explain all the condoms?" The man sighs. "Have you ever tried going into a pharmacy, asking for aspirin, and winking the whole time?" A pretty blonde woman is driving down a country road when her car breaks down. She's lucky to be near a farmhouse, so she goes up to the door and asks the farmer if she can stay the night until help arrives. The farmer agrees, but warns her, "You can stay, but don't mess with my sons, Jed and Luke." She looks inside and sees 2 young men, both in their 20s, and agrees. After they've gone to bed, the woman gets an idea. She quietly sneaks into their room and says, "How about I teach you the ways of the world?" The boys are confused, but she continues, "But I don't want to get pregnant, so you'll need to wear these." She gives them condoms, and the 3 of them spend the night together. 5 years later, Jed and Luke are sitting on the porch. Jed says, "Remember that blonde woman who stayed here and taught us everything?" Luke replies, "Yeah, I remember." "Well," says Jed, "do you care if she gets pregnant?" "Nope," says Luke. "Then let's take these bloody things off." A dentist was preparing to clean an elderly lady's teeth. Noticing that she was a little nervous, he decided to ease her anxiety with a story as he put on his surgical gloves. "Do you know how they make these rubber gloves?" he asked. She shook her head. "Well," he began, "down in Mexico, they have this huge factory with a big tank of latex. The workers are selected based on hand size, and they each dip their hands into the tank. Then they walk around while the latex sets and dries right onto their hands. Once it's dry, they peel off the gloves and throw them into a big crate marked 'Finished Goods' and start all over again." The woman didn't laugh, but 5 minutes later, as the dentist continued the procedure, she suddenly burst out laughing. Blushing, she said, "I just had a thought. I bet that's how they make condoms." Sophie, a traditional Italian woman, had just gotten married and was still a virgin. On her wedding night, staying at her mother's house, she felt nervous. Her mother reassured her, "Don't worry, Sophie. Luca is a good man. Go upstairs and he'll take care of you." Sophie went upstairs, but when Luca took off his shirt, revealing a hairy chest, she ran downstairs to her mother. Mama, Luca has a big, hairy chest." Her mother replied, "Don't worry, Sophie. All good men have hairy chests. Go upstairs. He'll take good care of you." So, Sophie went back upstairs. But when Luca took off his pants, revealing his hairy legs, she ran downstairs again. Mama, Luca has hairy legs." Her mother reassured her. "All good men have hairy legs. Go upstairs and he'll take good care of you." Finally, Sophie went upstairs again, but when Luca took off his socks, she saw that he was missing 3 toes on his left foot. Sophie ran downstairs, shouting, Mama, Luca has a foot and a half." Her mother, without missing a beat, said, "Stay here and stir the pasta. This is a job for Mama." A young girl decided to try out a miniskirt for the first time. Feeling both excited and nervous, she turned to her brother-in-law for advice. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" she asked shyly. "When I bend over, can you check if my underwear is showing?" The brother-in-law, trying to appear serious, observed her closely as she bent down. After a long moment, he said, "Nope, it's not showing at all. But next time, don't forget to actually wear one." A man went to the dentist to have a tooth pulled, but when the dentist brought out the needle for freezing, the man immediately protested. "No way, I hate needles," he said. Next, the dentist tried offering laughing gas, but the man objected again. "I can't do the gas. The mask feels suffocating." The dentist then asked if the man would be okay with a pill. "No problem," the man said. The dentist returned and handed the man a Viagra tablet. The man, confused, asked, "Wow, I didn't know Viagra worked as a painkiller." The dentist smirked and said, "It doesn't, but it'll give you something to hold on to when I pull your tooth." A guy and a girl meet at a bar, hit it off, and decide to go back to her place. After a few drinks, the guy takes off his shirt, washes his hands, then takes off his trousers and washes his hands again. The girl, intrigued, says, "You must be a dentist." Surprised, the guy asks, "How did you figure that out?" "Easy," she replies. "You keep washing your hands. One thing leads to another, and they make love. Afterward, the girl says, 'You must be a really good dentist.' Feeling confident, the guy asks, 'How did you know that?' She smiles and says, 'Didn't feel a thing.'" An Italian guy is out in Rome picking up women. While at his favorite bar, he spots a striking blonde, and they hit it off. Soon enough, they're back at his place, and they have their way with each other. Afterward, the Italian, pleased with himself, rolls over, lights a cigarette, and asks, "So, did you finish?" She pauses for a moment and replies, "No." Surprised but undeterred, he puts out the cigarette, rolls back on top of her, and this time lasts even longer than the first round. Once again, he rolls over, lights another cigarette, and asks, "So, did you finish?" She responds, "No." Stunned, but still feeling his pride, he puts out the cigarette and gets back to work. After some time and effort, he finally finishes. Barely able to roll over, he lights yet another cigarette and asks, "So, did you finish?" She looks at him, a little confused, and says, No, I'm Swedish." Ed and Carolyn met on a singles cruise, and Ed quickly fell head over heels for her. When they discovered they lived just a few miles apart, Ed was ecstatic. He immediately started asking her out, and within a couple of weeks, they were enjoying dance clubs, restaurants, concerts, movies, and museums together. Ed became convinced that Carolyn was his soulmate and true love. Every date seemed to top the last. On their 1-month anniversary since their first dinner on the cruise ship, Ed took Carolyn to a fine restaurant. After a few cocktails while waiting for their salad, Ed said, "I guess you can tell that I'm very much in love with you. Before we continue with this relationship, there's something serious I need to talk about. I'm a total golf nut. I play, I read about it, I watch it on TV. In short, I eat, sleep, and breathe golf. If that's going to be an issue, I need you to tell me now." Carolyn paused, took a deep breath, and replied, "Ed, that won't be a problem. I love you for who you are, and I love golf too. But since we're being honest, there's something I need to tell you. For the last 5 years, I've been a hooker." Ed paused for a moment, then said, "That's all right. I bet it's because you're not keeping your wrists straight when you hit the ball." A burglar was sneaking into a museum when he noticed the guard on duty sitting with his head in his hands, crying. "I can't believe I've worked here for 10 years and nobody's remembered my birthday again," he moaned. "Longer hours, more work, and no appreciation. I just can't do this anymore." The burglar had the perfect opportunity to slip past, but something about the guard's sadness made him pause. Feeling sympathy, he decided to abandon his plan. Instead of sneaking around, he walked straight down to the curator's office and kicked open the door. Inside were the museum director, the head of HR, and the head of security, deep in a meeting. "What are you doing here? How did you get past the guard?" the director shouted. The burglar, looking at them all, calmly said, "Gentlemen, I'm afraid you've let your guard down." A golfer in Ireland hooked his drive into the woods. While searching for his ball, he found a little leprechaun lying on his back with a big bump on his head and the golf ball beside him. Horrified, the golfer quickly grabbed his water bottle from the cart and poured it over the little guy, reviving him. What happened?" the leprechaun asked, groggy. "I'm afraid I hit you with my golf ball," the golfer replied. "Oh, I see. Well, you got old Patty here fair and square. You get 3 wishes, so what do you want?" the leprechaun said. "Thank God you're all right," the golfer exclaimed. "I don't want anything. I'm just glad you're okay. I apologize again." With that, he walked off. "Wow, what a nice guy," the leprechaun thought to himself. "I'll give him the 3 things I'd want. A great golf game, all the money he ever needs, and a fantastic love life." A year passed, and the golfer found himself back on the same hole, hitting another bad drive into the woods. There, waiting for him, was the leprechaun. "'Twas me that made you hit the ball here," the little guy said with a grin. "Just wanted to ask, how's your golf game?" "My game is fantastic," the golfer responded. "I'm an internationally famous golfer now." He smiled, adding, "By the way, it's good to see you're all right." "Oh, I'm fine now, thank you. I did that for your golf game," the leprechaun replied. "And tell me, how's your money situation?" "Why, it's wonderful," the golfer beamed. "Whenever I need cash, I just reach into my pocket and pull out $100 bills I didn't even know were there." "I did that for you, too. And how's your love life?" the leprechaun asked. The golfer blushed, looked away, and said shyly, "It's okay." Come on now," urged the leprechaun. "I just want to know if I did a good job here. How many times a week do you do the deed?" Blushing even harder, the golfer looked around, then whispered, "Once, sometimes twice a week." "What?" the leprechaun gasped in shock. "That's all? Only once or twice a week?" "Well," the golfer said, "I figure that's not bad for a Catholic priest in a small parish." On Monday morning, a preacher arrived at his church office to find a dead mule in the churchyard. He called the police, but since there didn't seem to be any foul play, they referred him to the health department. The health department said there was no health risk and directed him to the sanitation department. The sanitation manager explained that he couldn't pick up the mule without authorization from the mayor. Reluctantly, the preacher called the mayor, who was known for his bad temper. The mayor didn't disappoint. He immediately began ranting at the preacher. "Why did you call me for this? Isn't it your job to bury the dead?" The preacher, praying for guidance, responded, "Yes, Mayor, it is my job to bury the dead, but I always like to notify the next of kin first." During his Sunday sermon, the preacher spoke about forgiving your enemies. After a long sermon, he asked how many in the congregation were willing to forgive their enemies. About half raised their hands. Not satisfied, he continued his sermon for another 20 minutes and asked the question again. This time, around 80% raised their hands. Still not satisfied, he lectured for another 15 minutes and asked again. This time, nearly everyone responded, except for one elderly lady sitting in the back. "Mrs. Jones, are you not willing to forgive your enemies?" the preacher asked. "I don't have any," she replied. "Mrs. Jones, that's remarkable. How old are you?" 97, she said. "That's incredible. Mrs. Jones, would you please come up to the front and tell the congregation how a person can live to be 97 and not have a single enemy in the world?" The sweet old lady slowly made her way down the aisle, turned around, and said, "It's easy. I just outlived the bastards." A college student wanted to sit next to one of his professors at lunch. However, the teacher, with an arrogant look, said, "A swan shall not be friends with a pig." The student smiled and replied, "Then I shall fly on." The teacher, vexed by the cheeky reply, decided to do everything in his power to fail the student. At the oral exam, he asked the student the hardest questions, but the student answered them all brilliantly. Hoping to still fail him, the teacher asked one more tricky question. "You're walking down a road and you find two bags. One contains gold, the other contains cleverness. Which one do you choose?" "The gold," said the student confidently. "Wrong," the teacher said. "I'd choose cleverness because that's more important than money." The student shrugged and replied, "Everyone chooses what they don't have." The teacher, fuming, wrote "ass" on the student's paper in frustration. The student left without looking at the paper. However, he returned shortly, handed the paper back to the teacher, and said, "Excuse me, sir, you signed my paper, but you forgot to give me my grade." A big city lawyer went duck hunting in rural North Alberta. He shot and dropped a bird, but it fell into a farmer's field on the other side of a fence. As the lawyer climbed over the fence, an elderly farmer drove up on his tractor and asked what he was doing. The lawyer replied, "I shot a duck, and it fell in this field. I'm going to retrieve it." The old farmer, named Peter, said, "This is my property, and you're not coming over here." The lawyer, feeling indignant, said, "I'm one of the best trial lawyers in Canada. If you don't let me get that duck, I'll sue you and take everything you own." The old farmer smiled and said, "Apparently you don't know how we settle disputes in Alberta. We settle small disagreements like this with the three-kick rule." The lawyer, confused, asked, "What's the three-kick rule?" The farmer replied, "Well, since the dispute happens on my land, I get to go first. I'll kick you 3 times, then you kick me 3 times, and we'll go back and forth until someone gives up." The lawyer, thinking he could easily handle the old farmer, agreed to the contest. The farmer slowly climbed down from his tractor, walked up to the lawyer, and planted the first kick, a steel-toed work boot, straight into the lawyer's groin. The lawyer dropped to his knees in agony. The farmer's second kick landed in the lawyer's midriff, sending his lunch flying from his stomach. By the time the farmer delivered his third kick to the lawyer's rear end, the lawyer was face first, in a fresh cow pie. Summoning all the strength he had left, the lawyer slowly got to his feet, wiping his face with the arm of his jacket. He said, "All right, you old fart. Now it's my turn." The old farmer smiled and said, "You can have the duck." At a convention, 3 receptionists were chatting about how dodgy their coworkers were. The first one said, "No one is dodgier than car salesmen. My colleagues will patch up a car just enough so it drives away from the yard, but breaks down shortly after, and they'll claim it was in perfect condition. The second one replied, "That's nothing. I work in a law office, and we have lawyers who will represent your co-workers in court and make sure they're not responsible for a lemon. They're the dodgiest." The third receptionist shook her head and said, "That hits close to home. I recently bought a car that did exactly that. I drove it to work, parked it, but when I came back after work, it wouldn't start. So I took the car yard to court, and their lawyer argued so well that they weren't at fault." The first receptionist asked, "So which was dodgier?" The third receptionist replied, "My colleagues. I work for the local police, and while I was sitting in my broken-down car in the station car park trying to get it started, one of my colleagues reversed into me and then arrested me for reckless driving." A large corporation hires a tribe of ex-cannibals. They tell them, "You have full rights as employees, but you're not allowed to eat anyone." Things go smoothly for several weeks. But then the CEO calls the tribe into his office and says, "One of the employees has been missing for a few days now. This is awkward to ask, but did you eat them?" The chief of the tribe checks with his people and replies, "No, sir, we haven't eaten anyone. We've left that all behind us." The CEO, though still suspicious, has no proof, so he apologizes and sends them back to work. Once they are out of earshot, the chief turns to his tribe and asks, "Okay, which one of you idiots did it?" A tribesman sheepishly raises his hand and admits, "I ate the cleaning lady." Enraged, the chief slaps him and yells, "You fool! We've been eating department heads, marketing executives, and efficiency consultants for weeks, and nobody noticed. Then you had to go and eat someone they'll actually miss." Agency. "Sir, we found 3 candidates that meet your requirements. How would you like their placements?" Manager. "Here's what you do. Take 100 bricks and put them in a closed room. Then send the candidates in, lock the door, and leave them for a few hours. When you return, analyze the situation and place them accordingly. If they're counting the bricks, put them in accounts. If they're recounting the bricks, put them in auditing. If they've made a mess of the whole room with the bricks, put them in engineering. If they're arranging the bricks in strange patterns, put them in planning. If they're throwing the bricks at each other, put them in operations. If they're sleeping, put them in security. If they've broken the bricks into pieces, put them in information technology. If they're sitting idle, put them in human resources. If they claim they've tried different combinations but haven't moved a single brick, put them in sales. If they've already left for the day, put them in marketing. If they're staring out the window, put them in strategic planning. And if they're talking to each other but not a single brick has been touched, congratulate them and put them in management." In a small town, there was a Gypsy Psychic known for her ability to read minds and do divinations. One day, she went shopping for clothes. After trying on several outfits, a salesgirl approached and asked if she could bring her some other options. "Sure," said the psychic, and the girl went off to fetch the dresses. When the salesgirl returned, the psychic glanced at the clothes and raised an eyebrow. "There's no way these will fit me. They're all large," the psychic said. "I've been working here a while," the salesgirl replied. "Believe me, I think these will fit you." "Nope, no way," said the psychic. "How do you know if you haven't even tried them on?" the frustrated salesgirl asked. "Trust me," said the psychic with a smirk. "I'm a medium." A trucker walked into a coffee shop at a truck stop and placed his order. "I'll have 3 flat tires, a pair of headlights, and a pair of running boards." The brand-new blonde waitress, not wanting to seem clueless, went to the kitchen and asked the cook, "This guy out there just ordered 3 flat tires, a pair of headlights, and a pair of running boards. Does he think we're an auto parts store?" "No," the cook replied. 3 flat tires means 3 pancakes. A pair of headlights is 2 eggs sunny side up, and running boards are 2 slices of crispy bacon." "Oh, okay," said the waitress, and she thought for a moment before scooping up a bowl of beans and handing it to the trucker. The trucker looked confused and asked, "What are the beans for, Blondie?" She smiled and said, "I thought while you're waiting for your flat tires, headlights, and running boards, you might as well gas up." A soap factory faced a major issue. Sometimes empty boxes were shipped out without the soap inside, which hurt their reputation with buyers and distributors. Understanding the importance of these relationships, the CEO gathered his top team. 6 months and $8 million later, they had an excellent solution. On time, on budget, and high quality. The new system involved using a special scale that would ring a bell and flash lights whenever a box weighed less than it should. The line would stop. A worker would remove the defective box, and the line would resume. Thanks to this new system, no empty boxes were being shipped out anymore. A few weeks later, the CEO decided to review the first-week report. Since the scales were installed, there hadn't been a single empty box shipped out. Every day, a dozen defective boxes were being removed exactly as projected. Customer complaints were almost non-existent, and market share was increasing. The CEO was pleased, believing the $8 million investment was well spent. However, he noticed that after 3 weeks, the number of defective boxes removed dropped to 0. Surprised, he looked into the issue and found the engineers had verified that the report was accurate. The scales really weren't picking up any defects. All the boxes that reached the scales were good. Confused, the CEO went to the factory floor to investigate. He discovered that just before the new $8 million scale, a $20 desk fan had been placed on the line, blowing the empty boxes off the conveyor belt and into a bin. He asked the line supervisor about it. "Oh, that," the supervisor said. "Bert, the kid from maintenance, put it there because he got tired of walking over to remove the boxes and restart the line every time the bell rang."